and covered the kitchen floor using paint and pieces of linoleum which we found at the city dump. We had electricity, and even though we could not drink the water because it was old and smelled like sulfur, we used it for bathing. We heated it in a pot on our stove and poured it into large aluminum containers that we used for a bathtub. To get drinking water, we took out a 5-gallon bottle and filled it at Texaco gas station downtown. Along the front edge of our barrack, Roberto planted red, pink, and white geraniums. Around them he built a fence and painted it, also using supplies from the city dump. To the right of our house, a few yards away, stood 3 large oil barrels that served as garbage cans for the residents. Mr. Bonetti periodically burned the garbage and hauled the remains to the city dump in his truck. Behind our barrack was the outhouse that we shared with 2 other families. Sometimes on rainy days, the earth underneath would shift and tilt the toilet to one side, making it difficult for us to balance inside. Mr. Bonetti nailed a rope to the side wall to give us something to hold on to. The week after we arrived in Santa Maria, we enrolled in school. Roberto started the 10th grade in Santa Maria High School for the first time that year. Trumpito Torito resumed elementary school at Main Street School. At El Camino Junior High, I continued the 8th grade, which I had started in Corcoran, the first week in November after the grape season was over. Ruben and Rory were still too young to go to school. Mama stayed home to take care of them. Even though this was my first time in 8th grade at El Camino, I did not feel too nervous. I remembered a few of the kids in my class because they had been in the 7th grade the year before. Some of them I hardly recognized. They had grown taller, especially the boys. I stayed the same, 4 feet 11 inches. I was one of the smallest kids in the school. I liked my 2 teachers. I had Mr. Milo for math and science in the morning, and Miss Ellis for English, history, and social studies in the afternoons. In history, we concentrated on the U.S. government and Constitution. I enjoyed Mr. Milo's class the most because I did better in it than English. Every Thursday, Mr. Milo gave a math quiz, and the following day he arranged our desks according to how well we did on the test. The student with the highest score had the honor of sitting in the front seat, first row. Sharon Ito, the daughter of the Japanese sharecropper, for whom we picked strawberries during the summer, and I alternated taking that first seat, although she sat in it more often than I did. I was glad we did not have the same seating arrangements for English. As days went by, Papa's back did not get better, and neither did his mood. Mama, Roberto, and I took turns massaging him with Vicks VapoRub. When he was not complaining about not being able to work, he lay in bed motionless, with an empty look in his eyes. He took a lot of aspirins, ate very little, and hardly slept during the night. During the day, when he was exhausted, he took short naps. Early one evening, when Papa dozed off, Mama took Roberto and me outside. "I don't think your Papa could work in the fields anymore," she said, rubbing her hands on her apron. "What are we going to do?" After a long pause, Roberto answered, "I've been thinking about getting a job in town. I am tired of working in the fields." "Yes, a job that is year-round," Mama said. "That's a good idea," I said enthusiastically. "Then we won't have to move to Fresno again." "Maybe Mr. Sims can help me," Roberto said. "Who's Mr. Sims?" "He's the principal of Main Street School," I answered. "Remember, he gave me a green jacket." Trying to help his memory, Roberto answered, "He also brought me," her memory, Roberto added, "he also brought me a pair of shoes when he saw mine were worn out. I was in the 6th grade. "Ah, sí. Es un muy buena gente," Mama said, finally recalling who he was. Mr. Sims agreed to help Roberto find a part-time job in town. He told my brother he would let him know when he found something. Meanwhile, Roberto and I continued working, thinning lettuce and topping carrots after school and on Saturdays and Sundays. Several days later, Mr. Sims told Roberto that he had found a job for him. He had set up an appointment for my brother to see the owner of the Buster Brown shoe store on Broadway that Saturday afternoon. Roberto, Mama, and I were very excited. Early Saturday morning, Roberto and I headed for work thinning lettuce. As he drove, Roberto could not stop talking about his new job at the shoe store. His appointment that afternoon seemed like a long time away. To make the hours in the field go faster, we decided to challenge ourselves. We marked a spot on our rows about a third of the way in to see who could reach it without straightening up. "Ready, go," Roberto said. I stooped over and began thinning with my 6-inch hoe. After about 20 minutes without rest, I could no longer stand the pain in my back. I dropped to my knees and continued thinning without stopping. As soon as we reached the marked spot, I fell over. Roberto did too. "We did it," I said out of breath, "but my back is killing me." To ease the pain, I lay flat on my stomach in the furrow, and Roberto pressed down on my back with his hands. I felt relief as my spine cracked. "You're getting old, Panchito." "Let's rest," Roberto said, laughing. I chuckled between moans. Roberto lay on his stomach next to me. I turned over on my back and I looked up at the gray sky. The dark clouds threatened rain. "I am tired of moving every year," Roberto said, picking up small dirt clouds and tossing them. "Me too," I said. Then, following a moving cloud with my eyes, I asked, "Do you ever wonder what we'll be doing 10 or 20 years from now, or where we'll be living?" Looking around to make sure no one was listening, Roberto whispered, "If we don't get deported." Then he added confidently, "In Santa Maria, of course. I can't imagine living anywhere else." "What about you?" Recalling the different labor camps we lived in, I answered, "I don't want to live in Selma, Visalia, Bakersfield, or Corcoran." After thinking about it a while, I said, "I like Santa Maria, so if you decide to live here forever, I will too." Right after lunch, Roberto left work to clean up and keep his appointment. I continued working and thinking about Roberto's new job. Every few minutes I straightened up to give my back a rest. This was our chance to stay in Santa Maria all year and not move to Fresno to pick grapes and miss school, I said to myself. The more I thought about the idea, the more excited I became. Perhaps Roberto could get me a job at the shoe store, too, I thought. "How about that, Buster Brown?" I said out loud, flipping the hoe in the air and catching at the handle. Just as I finished my row, it started to rain. I ran for cover under a pepper tree and waited for Roberto. When he returned to pick me up, his mood was darker than the sky. "What's the matter?" I asked. "You didn't get the job?" Roberto shook his head. "No, I got the job," he said, "but not working at the store." "Doing what then?" I asked impatiently. "Cutting his lawn, once a week," Roberto answered sadly. His lips quivered. "Oh no," I exclaimed, throwing my hoe on the ground in anger. Roberto cleared his throat, wiped his eyes with his shirt sleeve, and said, "I am going to see Mr. Sims after school on Monday. Maybe he can suggest something else." He picked up his hoe and handed it to me. "Don't lose faith, Panchito," he said, putting his arm around me. "Things will work out." Monday morning my mind was not on school. I kept worrying about Papa and thinking about Roberto. I hope he gets a job, I thought, but what if he doesn't? "No, he will," I said to myself. To make things worse, that afternoon Miss Ellis gave our class an assignment I was not expecting. "I am passing out an important part of the Declaration of Independence that I want you to memorize," she said, counting the number of words to hand out in each row. Sheets to hand out in each row. Her announcement evoked a series of moans and groans from the class. "Now there is no need for that," she said, smiling. "The part I want you to know by heart is very short." Once everyone had the sheet of paper, she read the first few lines to the class. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them, those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. You see, it's not difficult. You can recite it to me independently or for extra credit in front of the class." We were to let her know when our preference would be the following week. For me, there was only one choice. It was to recite it to her privately. I did not want to go in front of her desk and risk being laughed at because of my Mexican pronunciation. I knew I had a thick accent, not because I heard it myself, but because sometimes kids made fun of me when I spoke English. I could not take a chance on this happening in front of the whole class, even though I wanted to get the extra credit. That afternoon after school, I took the bus home. On the way, I tried to memorize the lines of the Declaration of Independence, but I had trouble concentrating. I was wondering what Mr. Sims had told Roberto. When I got home and saw La Cucaracha, I knew that Roberto was already there. I rushed in. Papa, Mama, and Roberto were sitting at the kitchen table. "What happened? Tell me," I said excitedly. "What do you think?" Roberto asked, trying to conceal his smile. I glanced at Papa and Mama. They were beaming. "You got a job," I cried out. "Yes, Mr. Sims offered me the janitorial job at Main Street School," he answered, grinning from ear to ear. "It's a year-round job," Mama said, looking at Papa. Being careful with his back, Papa stood up slowly and hugged her gently. He then turned to Roberto and said, "Education pays off, mi hijo. I am proud of you. Too bad Mama and I didn't have the opportunity to go to school." "But you've taught us a lot, Papa," I answered. I had not seen Papa that happy in weeks. After supper, I sat at the table to do my homework. I was so excited about Roberto's job that it was difficult to focus. But I was determined to memorize the lines from the Declaration of Independence and to recite them perfectly without forgetting a single word. I took the text and broke it down line by line. I looked up the words for which I did not know: self-evident, endowed, inalienable, and pursuit. I added them to the English words I kept in my new black pocket notepad. I had gotten into the habit of writing down a different English word and its definition every day and memorizing it. After I looked up the meaning of the words, I wrote the entire sentence in my notepad in tiny letters. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." I went over that first line many times until I memorized it. My plan was to memorize at least one line a day so I could recite it on Friday of the following week. On Wednesday after school, Roberto drove me to El Camino Junior High to pick me up so I could help him clean Main Street School. It was starting to rain. When we arrived at the school, we headed to the basement to the janitor's closet to get out the cleaning cart. It held a large cloth trash bag, a dust broom, a sponge, and toilet supplies. As we entered the first classroom we were to clean, it brought back memories. It was the same room I had been in first grade when I had Mrs. Scalapino. Everything looked the same except the desks and chairs seemed a lot smaller. I sat down at the teacher's desk, took out my pocket notepad, and began to read the second and third sentence I needed to memorize. That they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them, those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I went over to the cart and picked up the wet sponge and began wiping the blackboard. I recited the lines in my head. Thunder and lightning interrupted my concentration. I looked out the window. It was pouring rain. Through the reflection of the window pane, I could see Roberto behind me, dust mopping the floor. By Friday, I had memorized the introductory lines of the Declaration of Independence and could recite them with relative ease. Only the word inalienable caused me problems. I had trouble saying it, so I broke it into syllables and repeated each sound slowly, following the whole word. On the way home from school, I took the black notepad from my shirt pocket, closed my eyes, and practiced saying inalienable silently to myself. The kid sitting next to me gave me a puzzled look and said, "Are you trying to say something?" His question took me by surprise. "No," I answered. "Why do you ask?" "Well, you keep moving your lips." A bit embarrassed, I told him what I was doing. I don't think he believed me because he stared at the notepad I was holding in my hands, mumbled, and changed sheets. The school day started out just right. In the morning, Mr. Myler returned the math exams to our class and asked us to rearrange our seats according to our scores. I sat on the first seat in the front row. This was definitely a good sign. I even looked forward to my recitation to Miss Elo's class that afternoon. At 1 o'clock, right after lunch, I was the first one in Miss Ellis's classroom. I sat on the front desk going over the recitation one last time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I checked the text, my notepad, to make sure I had not forgotten anything. It was perfect. Feeling confident, I placed the notepad inside my desk and waited for class to start. After the bell rang and everyone was seated, Miss Ellis began to take roll. She was interrupted by a knock on the door. When she opened it, I could see Mr. Denevi, the principal, and a man standing beside him. The instant I saw the green uniform, I panicked. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. I began to tremble and could feel my heart pounding against my chest, although it wanted to start to escape, too. Miss Ellis and the immigration officer walked up to me. Putting her right hand on my shoulder and looking at the officer, she said sadly, "This is him." My eyes clouded. I stood up and followed the immigration officer out of the classroom into his car marked Border Patrol. I sat in the front seat as the officer drove me from Broadway to Santa Maria High School to pick up Roberto.